So, can I please invite to the stage Mohammed Hawauri? If Mohammed, see, this is when you know you need more black coffee. So if Mohammed Hawauri is here, can he please come over to the left-hand side of the stage? Now, we're going to be going to our final panel discussion of the day. Do remember the official Twitter hashtag is SWS17. So do share your experiences and your learnings of today with us. Now, I'm delighted to bring on stage our moderator, and it is indeed a discussion entitled Chaos to Clarity, Gearing Up for the Upturn. Yes, we're ready for a bit of an upturn. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Sridhar Sampath. And I'm delighted that Sridhar is going to be introducing all of his panelists.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vextra. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we get started, I know there's only one thing between lunch and me, and that's this panel discussion, so bear with us. So can I call on stage our first panelist, Mr. Anand Soni, who's the CFO of BAFCO. He's a seasoned senior finance professional with over 24 years of experience managing group, financial, commercial, and business aspects. Please be seated, Anand. Thank you very much for being with us. Mr. Shafiqur Rahman, who is the partner with Ahmal Akbari Chartered Accountants with over 20 years of experience in financial accounting and financial management. He is a CPA and a CA from Pakistan. So welcome. Thank you very much, Shafiq, for being here. Mr. Ahmed Ibrahim, who is a partner and the head of equity capital market in Al Tamimi and Company. Extensive experience in equity capital markets and leading all IPOs. Thank you very much, Ahmed, for joining us. And finally, Mr. Mohammed Hawari, who is the regional director of Growfin Egypt. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for joining us.
Thank you.
Also comes with a wealth of experience as a regional investment director for Middle East and North Africa region. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the session that if you are a small business owner, an entrepreneur, and you're struggling with some of the questions, this is the time you can get them answered, because we have here a panel of experts who are going to talk about how the new commercial companies law is going to impact you, about how VAT is going to impact you, and also some of the challenges that you face on financial management. If you have questions, be ready with your questions. I'm going to ask them some preliminary questions, and then once we are done with that, you can obviously pick up your questions and answer them, or get them answered. Okay, so let's start with all the panelists here. Gentlemen, since the morning, we've already had a chat about how the scenario looks regionally. We've spoken about best practices for SMEs. My question to all of you, and I would like you to take just about 1 minute answering each of these. In your opinion, what is the real business landscape? What can the SMEs look forward to in the near to midterm future? And I'd like you to keep it positive. And if there are some developmental aspects, please do include that as well. So I'll start with you, Anand, please.
Thank you, Sridhar. 2016, in my view, was a cautious year. I think SMEs struggled, both for internal reasons and external reasons. But in 2017, when I have been interacting with the various ownership of the SMEs, one thing very clear is there is a guarded optimism. The revenues are picking up. Overall, there's a reconciliation to the change environment. And one of the important things, there is an anticipation of the new regulations which are going to come in the market, which will give the confidence. And I believe there will be more of trust between the banks and the SMEs once these regulations come.
Fantastic.
So yes, I'm a die-hard optimist. I have been in the UAE for the last 12 years. I have seen pre-2008, I have seen post-2008. And therefore, I have a firm belief that 2017 is a guarded optimism better than 2016.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anand. Shafiq?
Yeah, in my point of view, it is analysis of a business compared to the competitive clients. Like analysis of strategies depend upon means strength and weakness, products and services, and the product model. And as everybody knows, globalization, change everything. Now, organization have to face a lot of challenges, environmental challenges, social challenges, political challenges that affects the climate structure of the end user. And on the other side, a lot of organizations, they have to faces the ethical challenges like labor standards, human rights, climate changes, and marketplace. And as everybody knows, now totally the environment is changed as a global change, because now globally is digital, converted to the digital market. They have to faces the international financial crisis. Now finally, environment economical shifted towards the innovation and the latest technology.
Thank you very much. So, guarded optimism, a lot of change on technology and innovation. Ahmed, from where you see, how do you see the business?
I think generally the SMEs plays very important role when it comes to economic or social front. And when you look at the outlook of SMEs for the next couple of years, you will see that Expo 2020 is reaching, and I think there are multi-billions are allocated of contracts from Dubai Expo 2020, which gives you an indication that I think in the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years, there will be a lot of developments to SMEs. There will always be a room for SMEs to grow. There will be new room for new entrants to come to the market. Again, the competition between the SMEs will again improve the quality of products of SMEs, which will create a new stream, a new breed of products that will always, elevate itself and find its market. So I think it's a very positive outlook in the next few years, and hopefully the competition and generally the investment environment here in the UAE will again encourage more SMEs to come on board.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ahmed. How about you, sir, Mr. Muhammad Awari?
So I would say that there is good news and there is bad news. The good news is that at no point in history has there been this amount of investment capital to be deployed into this sector. Wow. You have VCs, you have banks, you have SME funds, you have development funds, and what have you. A huge amount of capital to be deployed. Now, and it's worldwide, right? So they're looking for the right opportunity. And what makes or breaks the right opportunity, it's basically government. So the bad news is that in the MENA region, I think that the investment laws in general have been inflicted by the stigma of being dictated by the interests of big businesses, which is not necessarily the same as the interests of small and medium counterparts. So I think it's, the governments have a huge challenge to sort of shift writing the rules and the investment laws to suit more this very vital sector.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. In fact, my experience, since we also work around the region, and Mohammed, you also operate a lot around the region, yes, there is guarded optimism, but there is also a renewed hope that all these investments will come through. I know that it's happening in Saudi. We see it happening here. So there is a renewed hope that it will develop and the developmental engine will grow. So let me ask you this question, Mohammed, as a person who's been in the banking industry, how do you see the banking scenario changing versus the SME? Are there more financing options available? We had some people speak about it very briefly earlier on in the panel discussion. What do you see? Because you're in the financing market. For the SME specifically, do they have more products to use now?
Well, as I was just saying, the possibilities of financing for SMEs are just, there has never been this vast amount of possibilities for financing. So, but it's also a question of pinpointing who is the right audience for your pitch, right? So if you are an SME owner and you want to get some financing, maybe a bank isn't the right venue for you. If you're a tech startup, for instance, you're better off with a VC fund. If you're someone who's more focused on impact, then maybe you're better off with a development or an impact fund, right? So banking is not the only
solution.
Is not the only solution. Banks have been so far pushed by governments into getting into this sector. But until governments are able to turn this sector into an attractive financial sector for banks, I don't see these initiatives being a sustainable solution.
Fantastic. So what you're basically saying is that the entrepreneurs or the small business owners should have a robust strategy that not just looks at banks, but there are other options as well available that they can take advantage of. Thank you, Mohammed. Sure, please. Anybody else wants to?
See, I mean, in my experience in 2016 of at least dealing with 2 SMEs, and one was a success story and one was a failure story. I think one of the things, as I mentioned in my opening remark, there is a sort of a trust deficit between banks on the one side and the SMEs, and both are right in their own way. Banks believe the SMEs have to have more financial discipline, they have to be more accurate in terms of what they want for. There is a sort of financial indiscipline which is prevailing over. I was talking to one of the bankers as recently yesterday, and I asked him, I said, what are the challenges? You are flush with the funds. I'm one of the leading banks who is funding the SMEs. And his answer was, the challenge is, any request comes, the SME owners are not sure what they want. And then the second issue is the collaterals. Unlike a big corporate who's in the position to offer collaterals, that's where SMEs fall flat. They don't have it. So one of the failures which I looked into was, we got the facilities for that particular company, but the owners had issues on providing collaterals. But the suggestion which I always keep suggesting to the SMEs is, don't go for a funded overdraft facilities. Go for something like invoice discounting. Go for something like LTRs, which can help you in managing your day-to-day working capital. Because Sridhar, let's understand, SME per se is not going to go for an IPO. They need funds to manage the short-term
Their working capital, the short-term funding.
Because
Absolutely.
that's the challenge which they have on the collections, on the payments.
Brilliant.
And that's what banks will be taking a call in 2017.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is that both the banks and the SMEs need to go a certain distance to marry their respective interests so that it's a win-win for both, rather than expecting the other to always solve. And usually, this is what we hear from the SMEs as well as, oh, the banks are not doing anything about it. And the question that we always ask them is, so what have you done to get that solution from the bank? And usually it is as if we have abdicated our responsibility. So thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Ahmed Ibrahim, the question to you. There's a new commercial company law that's in the making, that's probably going to be there. What are the top critical clauses that SMEs need to be aware of so that they're prepared for it and they're managing it well, in your opinion, from a legal standpoint? Because there is the confusion. Somebody asked me this morning, do I necessarily have to have a local partner? And I said, no, there are other solutions. So can you highlight us more on how the commercial company law is going to deal with that, please?
Yeah, sure. The new companies law, it was one of the very long-awaited laws that everyone in the UAE was very anxious to know more about it. It was issued in 2015, and we had some sort of 3 months grace period until it came into force. And the new companies law actually came with a lot of incremental reforms compared to the old companies law. And actually, the new reforms were touching upon the private companies, including SMEs, and public joint stock companies as well, as for whatever companies would like to go public and offer the shares on the stock exchange. If we are going to focus on SMEs or private companies, we can find that, for example, the new law allows for sole ownership companies. So you don't need to have 2 shareholders in order to have a limited liability company. With that in mind, we have to note that maybe this is restricted to UAE nationals. So UAE nationals have this ability. Then we will always have to tackle the ownership requirements. And I would say that this is one of the unfortunate items or elements that have not been addressed in the new law in relation to the UAE ownership requirements. And until now, the UAE ownership components need to hold 51% of the company.
Okay.
However, there are always a lot of solutions when it comes to free zone. So SMEs, depending on their fields of expertise, they can also find the proper free zone that they can establish their company without any local
where they have 100% ownership.
Exactly, they can have 100% ownership.
Fantastic, fantastic.
The second component that has also been introduced by the new law is the ability of banks, and maybe this ties in with our previous note that we were discussing, ability of banks to finance SMEs. Now banks can have pledge of shares on LLC's company. Maybe previously there was this ability, but it was not really regulated by law. Now they have the support of law, and it's now been addressed in the new law, and financing institutions can now take pledge on shares on LLCs, and they can register and record this pledge on the DED. So it gives more comfort to financing institutions. There were also some logistical incremental reforms, like decreasing the number of days required to issue and call for the General Assembly meeting. Before that, it was 21 days. They've decreased that to only 15 days. They've lifted any cap on the appointment of managers, so now you can have as many managers as you wish. Maybe this can be a point that will be an issue if you are asking new shareholders and new partners to come on board with you, either through a financing institution like venture capitals, for example. They would like to have representation in the management. So now they have lifted the cap on the number of management. You can have a number of managers that can be representing a number of shareholders. Also, they've introduced some sort of a link between the existing rules that will govern public joint stock companies that will apply also on LLCs. The good thing of that is it provides a certain level of governance that all SMEs would require. Some SMEs would look at this as a little bit of cumbersome, but in my opinion, it's very important to have some sort of rules, governance in place to keep all the housekeeping process.
Which is what the banks expect too.
Exactly.
Right.
And if you would like to develop your SMEs and you want to polish the apple to make it more attractive to potential investors to grow your business, you need to have all governance in place. You don't need to wait until you find the right investor, but you need to have everything in place before that. So when a new investor comes on board, it will be more attractive compared to other SMEs that are a little bit behind.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for this clear delineation. So what I'm hearing from you, Ahmed, is that yes, there is a move from out of chaos to a bit more clarity. We are still not there. There are still steps to be taken, but there is a move. Shafiq, would you like to add something to that, please?
He had our value. Basically, before it was no compliance and governance. The most important thing right now, there is the governance and the compliance, like how to incorporate the company, the share capital, the detail of the shareholders is there, how to call the AGM, special resolution. So it means there is fully compliance is there. Regarding in companies ordinance, we mostly study, memorandum association and article of association. So now because the compliance and governance is there, so now every company, they have fully detailed, and the government can review and check how the company internal matter is compliance with the company memorandum.
Fantastic. Now, I also know that with the new law on VAT coming up, there is going to be an additional requirement for compliance as well. So, Shafiq, would you be able to throw some light on, very briefly, I know very high level, what are the key requirements or the things that SMEs should look forward to in the VAT scenario, how their compliance and corporate governance systems may have to change?
Everybody knows VAT is nowadays a hot topic and burning question in Emirates. Before it was imagined. Value-added tax, it's an indirect tax. Most of people, they know that Federal Taxation Authority has been announced by the Ministry of Foreign, and governance will be there in coming July 2017. And for the common man to understand, it is applied on the supply chain of goods and services on each stage. It is not like a sale tax or other tax. So it means any person who is going to fall under the category of the tax, he have to pay. So there are two things. One is like it is applied on the goods and services, but it is not as the government declared, it is not applied on the basic necessities of life. So good luck for the field, in the field of the healthcare and education. So means when the basic necessities of the life are exempt from the VAT, so it means it will be not a material effect of the economy. So on the other side means consumer effect depend upon the income behavior and the consumption behavior. If he is depending mostly on a basic necessities of the life, so VAT will not impact or material effect on another thing. For the common man, to understand the most important thing means, yes, VAT is there. The rate of the VAT will be 5%. It will be implemented on 1st January 2018, and it is not means on the basic necessities of life like food or other items, and also there is a health care and the education is also exempted. But for the detailed understanding, you must know the standard rate, exemption rate, and the zero rates. So for the common man, how SME he have to understand means VAT is practically will impact his business while dealing with the suppliers, while dealing with the consumer or the customer. He have to understand means either which supplier I have to be deal to encounter the VAT impact on his business. So first of all, he have to change his accounting as well as bookkeeping system. He have to literate himself as well as to the person who's involved in his company. So the detail already given by the mof.gov.ae for the common man, how the VAT will impact on his SME business.
Fantastic, thank you. And for those of you who don't know this, the Ministry of Finance has been rolling out, and you heard it earlier today as well, they have been rolling out a number of initiatives to make the general public, the business owners here aware of what VAT implies to them and how it's going to change their business. So take advantage of those free sessions and please attend it. All you need to do is to go on, log into mof.gov.ae, look up the VAT section, and you'll see all those seminars that are being conducted. It's a huge road show that they are doing to ensure that everybody knows about it. Anybody else would like to add something on the VAT?
Just to add to you, apart from the accounting thing which she discussed, there would be a temporary cash flow effect also once the VAT comes into effect. Effectively, it would mean that what you have VAT payable and VAT receivable, the net differential you'll have to pay. Of course, it won't be a cash flow impact in the real sense, but there's your finance department has to plan that for the month end, I'm going to have this outflow or this inflow. So somewhere down the line, the SME owners who are sitting here need to discuss with your finance team, understand from them if they're aware of how to manage the cash flow implications once it comes into the place.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anand. And this is something that SME owners must understand.
Final word I will add. For example, if somebody is not applying the VAT, he have to pay the penalties. Or if he don't understand the VAT, that will be his extra cost.
Fantastic. So if you don't take advantage of VAT, number one, there will be a VAT outflow, cash outflow on VAT payments. However, if you're in the other situation, you may also be credited for refunds from the government, and I understand that the government is working out a system by which that VAT credit will come back to you pretty much quickly. However, if you don't comply with the VAT regulations, there's a huge penalty as well, and that applies to across all businesses. Though there is a threshold, I believe that initially it will be only for the larger businesses with a higher revenue, and then later on for smaller businesses.
3.75.
And I think as a compliance, they probably will have to file a VAT return also, depending
Correct,
upon
on a monthly basis
or quarterly basis, depending upon what is eventually agreed on.
Fantastic.
So that's something which housekeeping has to be brushed up.
And you have to have the systems to take care of it. So Anand, you nicely touched upon the cash flow implications. Now, as an SME, one of the challenges that most SMEs have is, it was spoken about earlier today as well, cash flow. Corporate governance came up a couple of times. In fact, cash flow, I was sitting here in the front row and I heard the word cash flow coming up 6 times in the morning session. That's how critical. How many of you believe that cash flow is probably one of the biggest challenges that SMEs face? Thank you very much. So let's, Anand, in your opinion, with your experience in small businesses and in medium-sized businesses, what are the typical cash flow challenges that businesses face, and what can they do? If you were to quickly throw a couple of pointers on that and how they can resolve it.
Right. I understand there are many SME owners, so it's good to share my views with them. I think we need to understand how exactly SMEs operate. And let's be fair, Most of the SME owners, they have graduated over a level and then they have come to that level. That's great. But somewhere down the line, the financial and commercial aspects of running the business, I find a disconnect. So there are few reasons which, when I look at the current or when any SME faces financial problems, few of them are internal, few of them are external. You ask anyone, the first answer is, oh, I don't have funds. Banks are not funding. Oh, I'm not getting collections. These are more external reasons, and people try to take shelter under that. I agree with those reasons. However, for me, the most critical reasons are something internal to do with the way SMEs operate. And what are they? As I said, most of the SMEs which I have dealt with, the top ownership somewhat lacks the financial and commercial understanding because they feel finance, commercial is bookkeeping. So most of the organizations, they don't have the right books and accounts in place. They don't drive the business based on what my P&L is telling me to do. They will keep incurring expenses because, mind you, they're very good at business. They understand the business, right? So they're very good at business. But in terms of managing cost, managing revenue, they're not good at. Then talk about the processes, control mechanism. Again, there's a big disconnect. Last year, I was advising one of the SMEs, and here comes the owner and keeps telling me, Anand, well, he was an MEP subcontractor. He keeps telling me, look, we are getting business. We're doing great.
So what's the problem?
What's the problem? I said, what's the problem? Well, I find it difficult to pay salaries at the month end. I said, how come? I said, okay, let me look at it too. So I discussed with him, with a couple of owners. Well, the pricing was not correct. The processes were not in order. But the owners knew the business. So one of the things which I tell each and every SME owner is, please accept, if you are not financially and commercially great, you are great as a businessman, but you need to take care of that. That's one.
Okay.
And then there is, as I said, an inbuilt inhibition within the SME owners that the banks won't fund them, that there's a funding
Anand,
issue.
can I just pause you right there? So sorry to interrupt you, but because you talked about 3 areas which to me sound that I think others can also pitch in here. So you spoke about finance, you spoke about a sense of not having enough controls, and you also spoke about them not understanding the legal commercial part of the business. Anything that you gentlemen would like to add to what Anand said about challenges that SMEs face and the things that they need to look out for so that they have some clarity about how business develops? Anybody would like to?
I think when it comes to VAT, I think it's very important for SMEs to make sure that they are registered in the system.
They register in the system?
Yeah, no matter how small they are, because
okay.
maybe the threshold of registration in VAT could be 100,000 USD, like we're talking about more or less 400,000 dirhams. I would say even if your capital is less than that, go and register because you will be able to reclaim your VAT.
Which you are paying on your purchases.
Exactly. Otherwise, your suppliers will always impose VAT on you.
And your costs will go up.
Exactly. Your costs will go up and you will not be able to claim this back.
Fantastic.
So it's much better to get registered and you can at least offset whatever you pay against whatever you need to pay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ahmed, for that. Mohammed, I know you're bursting to say something.
Yeah. So, I think we see more often than not SME owners who come from a technical background. So they're very good at the technical knowledge of the industry they're in, but they lack basic business skills, such as financial literacy, for instance, which we're talking about, which creates the cash flow problems. It's
right.
one of the major reasons. So they're incapable of identifying a problem where operating cycle does not match the cash flow cycle, just because they don't have the basic grasp of this concept. So I would say that one of the most important things for an SME owner, especially if he or she is coming from a technical background, is to make sure they gain the basic literacy in the main business disciplines, which are finance, marketing, and
Amazing.
HR probably.
Thanks, Mohammed. And let me tell you this, I mean, you touched on a very raw nerve. My dad used to have a business which failed, unfortunately. He was a a technical man, an engineer who could fix anything, anytime. He started a business and failed, and it took us 18 years to come out of debt, right? So I know the pain. So when you're saying what you're saying, I feel as if you're talking something close to my heart. And this is something that I keep seeing with SME owners as well. If there are 3 things that SME owners need to have, one is financial acumen, a sense of strategy. How am I going to get to where I want to get to? And the ability to get this thing done through other people, because ultimately you want to grow a business. And this morning I met Zahira, who is right here, who is an artist, and she was saying that, look, how do we make a business out of this? A lot of us artists are passionate about their art. But how do you make a business out of it? How do you get people to buy it? How do you make profits out of it? How do you manage that? That's a challenge that a lot of them have. And I believe a lot of entrepreneurs get into business out of a passion, and then they kind of fail on some point. Shafiq, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, majority of the companies, especially SMEs, they are presently, having a liquidity issue, working capital problems. Before entrepreneurs, mostly in UAE, they have family business oriented. So now, majority of the business, they are now understanding the key factors of the business. Means which key factor is very much important. For example, the company, they have depend on innovation, because now most of the things are economy is based on the innovation and the knowledge. Who SME owner, he have the best knowledge in the market. He knows, like everybody knows, right decision with the right person, right place, and in the right direction. So when he have these all of the thing in a one way, definitely he knows his pro and cons, SWOT analysis. He before going to deal any contract, he have SWOT analysis, and he knows his cash position. Like Mr. Anand, he said, majority of the companies, they are short of the fund, and when they are short of the fund, then definitely there is the wages and salary and the rent will be outstanding. And when the manpower without salaries, you can imagine, they cannot do anything. Without fuel, it means the car cannot be worked. So you must be, as an entrepreneur, the management, the team must be with the fuel. And always the businessman is working between the bottom line. We speak as a, like the top level and the means between 2 lines always. Means not always he want to see the number 1 company of the, means in our business we speak as a boom and the recession. If he must be between them, definitely his business will be grown.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, we have about 12 odd minutes to go, and we have expert on finance here, we have an expert on legal commercial, we have an expert on corporate governance and audit, and an expert on financial challenges. I would like to throw it open to the audience here. We have a lady right here, Bextra, on the right, please.
Thank you. My name is Saima Aziz Mirza, and I've come from Dynaflow International. I want to ask one question regarding company which SMEs which want to start their business in social services. Like, how do you see the scope of these companies who want to give any social service to people? Like,
so from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, and from the finance standpoint, and also from the commercial standpoint, all the,
So a social enterprise. Ahmed, would you like to take that on, please?
I think it's, I'm a little bit unclear about...
How can somebody set up a social enterprise from a legal standpoint?
Yeah,
like giving social services to the community, right? You're not giving any product, any commercial services, but you are giving some social services to the community in Dubai.
So is it
such as means any advisory, such as means any thinking cafe, a thinking palace.
But for profit, am I right?
Yes, for profit. Yes.
Okay,
social
so a
innovation
social for profit enterprise. Mohammed, would you have some thoughts on that?
I think the main reason Ahmed is baffled with this question is that the law doesn't exist in the MENA region.
Right.
So the law exists in the UK, it exists in the US. You have company forms like the LC3 in the UK, for instance, which is a social enterprise. So the social enterprise is a non-profit, but it has the right to do for-profit activities, right, which is a combination. So the first problem is that the law doesn't exist in the MENA region,
Yeah, but we do, in the UAE, we do have the Community Development Authority that does some amount of licensing in that, in the NGO sector, so to say?
You'll have a lot of restrictions in doing a lot of the for-profit making. So most companies in this kind of environment, they resort to having a dual sort of existence, where they have a non-profit as well as a for-profit entity, and they operate under the same umbrella. There was an early trial in 2010 by the Egyptian government to pass this law, but after the 2011 uprising, it was sort of delayed. So this is the first challenge you have. There are a number of funds which have interest in this sort of work. Funds like Acumen Fund, for instance. But they don't operate in the region, although they had the regional office in Dubai, which served MENA and Africa, but they didn't operate in the region because of the lack of the legal framework.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that's the main hurdle, I would say.
Thank you, Mohammed. The next person, who's going to ask the question?
Hello. I'm addressing it to Mr. Mohammed.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I am Prabhash. I am managing partner for FinCirc International. We are also into business and management consultancy. You just discussed that the banks and the SMEs have to work together. But in the current scenario which I am seeing, the banks are not supportive of SMEs right now. They are saying that, there are few sectors which we would not like to fund, or right now, there is liquidity problems in the market, and that's why the banks are not taking a call. So what is the reason right now?
So your question is, what is the reason banks are not supporting SMEs and they become very selective on the products that they want to deal with or the industries they want to deal with?
Exactly.
So two reasons. Number one, they don't have the risk appetite. So basically because they're not familiar with the sector or they're not familiar with the industry the company is working in. There has been some trials by development institutions to help banks sort of learn about SMEs in specific industries. So they do a sort of a guarantee program. So you have USAID, for instance, they did a number of guarantee programs. So they go in and they make a deal with the bank. They tell him, we're going to guarantee 50% of your lending portfolio in this specific industry to SMEs in this specific country, for instance, right? So the program stays for like 3-4 years. At the end of the 3-4 years, the bank would have learned a bit more and they would have developed a risk appetite so that they can carry on their own. The second problem is that it takes just a lot of time, money, and effort to process a loan for an SME, almost the same cost as processing a loan for a big multinational. And the cost
benefit analysis just pushes them in terms of going to a larger company.
So there has to be an initiative, and again I have to go back to the government because they have to work this out, where they sort out a formula where the banks can get more benefit from the SME lending process without putting extra burden on the SME.
Thank you, Mohammed. So, if those of you who heard Mr. Saeed Amari speaking in the morning, he did mention, or at least he mentioned when I was speaking to him, that if you are an Emirati business owner, then there are banks that are supporting you, and the Mohammed bin Rashid Fund or the Dubai SME does give credit guarantees. So, some of the stuff that you were talking about does get sorted out currently for Emiratis. Obviously not available for the expats, but at least some steps have been taken to clarify and move in that direction. Thank you, Mohammed. Yes, sir. Third question. One second, sir.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Usman Siddiqui. I'm the managing partner of Maxcon Consulting. My question is directed to Mr. Ahmed. This question is for the sake of startups and small companies. We have already discussed and established that they struggle in generating funds from VCs and banks, as they are not very interested. So what I have seen through my journey is the interest of overseas investors, in particular from US, in the debt financing model, not the equity, where they have limited
State
risk.
your question, please. We're running out of time.
So in case where these overseas investors from US and other countries, they want to invest, is there any regulation that protect their interest so they are more interested? And we have more investment options as startups.
So your question is, if there is an investor coming in from the West, as in the US, are they protected when they invest here?
In terms of UAE laws.
In terms of UAE laws. Ahmed, would you be able to help us?
Yeah, basically, after the upgrading of UAE and Qatar to emerging market status by Morgan Stanley Index, I think the restrictions that were imposed on foreign funds to come to the UAE and Qatar has been now lifted, and I think there will be a flow of funds coming to UAE and Qatar after the uplift of the upgrading the markets to emerging markets. When it comes to protection, there is nothing specific to foreign investors. They will be treated like any other creditors or any other shareholder if they are going to come on board on an equity level. So they will have all the shareholders' right. According to the new law, they will always have the right to stop any type of resolutions by the majority shareholders that would harm their minority stake. Presumably they will be owning around 20% or so. Then they can stop these type of resolutions. They will always have the right to have nomination in the management of the company. The law allows them to somehow put safeguards in the articles of association of the company, whereby there will be some sort of reserved matters that the company or the management of the company will have to take their approval before proceeding to a certain type of resolution. These are all if they're going to come on an equity side. If they're going to come to a debt side, then as I mentioned earlier in my notice, there will always be availability for them to have pledge on shares if they are going to lend money. Now it's been regulated. It's now been public records that they can check if there are any existing pledge on the company or not. And if there is not, they can lend the money and they can have the pledge on shares, and now it's become public record. So it really depends whether they will come as a financiers on a debt side or on an equity side. And in both scenarios, there are always certain type of protection to them. It's not necessarily tailored to foreign investors, but it always covers local and international investors.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. Ahmed, one last question. We have exactly 2 minutes.
Thank you. This is Deeptan. I'm an ex-banker and now run my management consultancy firm, mainly focused on financial consulting. This question is towards Anand, and we discussed about the challenge.
Mr. Anand.
Yeah, we discussed about the challenges in terms of how the banks look at the SMEs and how the SMEs are unfortunately being faced the problems with the banks. Now, see, I've been a banker and now I advise SMEs.
Question,
also.
please, if you don't mind. We're running out of time.
The question. Now, one can expect that the SMEs do not understand how the banks think and hence are not up the curve on financial aspects. My question is, what are the banks doing? My understanding is that the bank's understanding of the commercial business is extremely shallow in this part of the world. What are the banks doing, and how is it that we can encourage the banks to impart training to the commercial bankers so that they take the efforts and the pains to understand the challenges that an SME faces, which unfortunately is lacking?
Thank you very much. So the question is, what can banks do to empower their employees with the skills so that they can understand the challenges that SMEs face? Anand.
You need to recognize that in 2016, a bank's appetite of funds was limited and they had better options than the SME to secure their funds. So obviously, there was a trust deficit. Now, with the new regulations coming up on the bankruptcy laws and various laws which will be in place, I'm sure the banks will be more keen and more comfortable in dealing with the SMEs. So answer to your questions, these laws will help. Plus, definitely, the banks also will be giving the internal training to their employees to see. Ultimately, it has to make a commercial sense to a bank. So yes, I agree with you. There is a sort of a reluctance to fund an SME because we all know there have been so many runoffs in Dubai and UAE in the 2016 in terms of the banks losing the money and providing against NPA. So we cannot run away from that reality. But that's what I said initially, that there is going to be a guarded optimism in 2017 towards the banks, and you should see a better bank approach and response to the SMEs than in 2016.
Thank you, Anand. And to answer your question, being absolutely crassly commercial, ask them to contact me. I can help them with that. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Mohammed Hawari, Mr. Ahmed Ibrahim, Mr. Shafiqur Rahman, and Mr. Anand Soni. Thank you very much. I hope you had a wonderful session, answered questions. They will be available during lunch to answer any further questions. With that, over to you, Baxter. Thank you very much. We are right on time. 30 seconds to go.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank
please
you.
a big round of applause for our moderator, Shraddha. And of course, he's joined by Anand, Mohammed, Shafiq, and Ahmed. Thank you all very much indeed.